Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. And what a fascinating story we have here. We have a young woman going back to work after giving birth to her baby. And this baby of hers is called Keegan, and he is a very sickly baby. He's obviously got colic, which means you cry all hours for no reason at all, and there's no explanation as to why you cry. So having a colicky baby is dreadful for any mother, because you can be up at all hours of the night attending to the child that won't stop screaming. And that had been Keegan's story. He'd been underweight, very pale, in very bad shape. But strange things are happening around the Stratton household. And this all happened after her daughter returned to work, and she relaxes on the patio, taking care of little Keegan. And little Keegan is losing his appetite, but appears to be getting a great deal healthier. His cheeks are glowing. He appears to be putting on weight. The colic has all but disappeared. But someone is nursing little Keegan. And this is when, unfortunately, Melinda's mother tends to fall asleep on the patio. So let's find out what is actually going on here. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with part 3 of this extraordinary story tonight. Nancy was comfortably caught up in a deep sleep, lying back comfortably on the Adirondack chair, completely oblivious of her immediate surroundings, so she failed to see the shadowy creature, with the long dark flowing hair the colour of coal, clandestinely approaching the wooden deck. Genevieve, who had run away from the stranger the day before, was more relaxed when the stranger approached again, and nonchalantly continued to play with the ball of wool. Genevieve seemed to realize that this strange, rather unorthodox, monstrous-sized human being, covered in hair, seemed only interested in one thing, and that was watching over baby Keegan. Nancy failed to see the figure lifting up little Keegan in her overlong arms, and staring at him lovingly, as she placed him on her swollen teat, laden with rich milk. Keegan suckled happily, until he'd had his fill. He gurgled with delight, as the stranger played with his little finger on his tiny hand, marvelling in awe at how anything could be this small. Her adoring motherly eyes delighted in how beautiful Keegan was. Keegan chuckled happily, his tiny fingers clutching some of the wispy strands of the stranger's hair. He found nothing odd or out of place about this motherly human being covered in hair that was attending to his every need, and did so with such a passionate devotion, as if it was her life's purpose to be a mother. The stranger was satisfied that the pale baby she'd nursed only days before looked so much better. There was colour in his cheeks. There was a rosy glow to him. His eyes were shining, and she was sure he'd gained weight. The stranger knew the quality of her milk was excellent, and would easily turn this baby's health around. Nancy did not see the disappointment on the stranger's face, as she replaced Keegan back in his cot, covering him with a blanket. The stranger glanced very briefly at Genevieve, who had fallen asleep next to the ball of wool that she had successfully decimated. Genevieve suddenly looked up at the stranger. She stretched out her paw very contentedly and continued to sleep. The day was beautiful, with the late afternoon sun casting such a pleasant warmth over everything. It was a couple of hours later when the tall, lofty stranger had all but disappeared from the porch, and left no memorable imprint of her presence, when Nancy had suddenly woken up. She was thrown rather violently out of her sleep, almost like a seal being tossed up in the air by an orca whale. She felt somewhat disorientated and confused as she bounced out of her groggy state as quickly as she could, but it wasn't easy. The annoying sound of her cell phone had stolen the silence with its shrill, very unpleasant ringtone that really needed to be changed, as it had given her quite the scare. Nancy grabbed her cell to see her daughter's name on the caller ID, and sighed warily. It was Melinda. She knew her daughter was calling to check up on the well-being of little Keegan again, so she had to answer the call, or Melinda would likely worry. She couldn't believe she'd fallen asleep again, when she had pacifically told herself very firmly it would never happen again. Did she really have no self-control? What on earth was wrong with her? Was looking after baby Keegan, proving to be too exhausting for her in her advancing age. Surely not. "Oh, hello, Melinda. Is that you?" Her voice sounded vague and unattentive, like someone who's woken up from a deep sleep and is trying to sound alert, but not succeeding in fooling anyone. "Hi, Mum. Is everything all right with you?" came Melinda's rather disquieted voice. "You sound awfully woozy, if you don't mind my saying. You haven't been sleeping, have you?" she said almost accusingly. "You know I rely on you, Mum, to watch over Keegan all the time. I can't have you falling asleep on the job, can I?" she teased. "But cat naps are definitely allowed, because you're not superhuman, are you? And it's definitely hard work looking after a baby. Believe me, I know that all too well." "Of course I haven't been sleeping, love. I just had a 5-minute power nap on the porch, that's all, with Keegan at my side, lying very peacefully in his cot," said Nancy. "You gave me a start, but I drifted off only for 5 minutes. That's all it was." "Oh, I don't have a problem with that," said Melinda. "It's not as if you've been asleep for hours, is it? I've not had an opportunity to phone you sooner, I'm afraid. I've been rushed off my feet again. It's mayhem in the salon, and I'm still fixing up so many of Kirsty's messes. If the truth be told, I'm surprised I have a business left at all to run. But thankfully many of my long-suffering clients are very forgiving and understand how difficult it is to actually rely on decent staff." "Well, I'm very pleased to hear that, love," said Nancy, glancing briefly at the time on her cell phone. She was horrified to realize she'd been asleep for 2.5 hours. How was that even possible? Where had the time got to? These days, when she was out on the porch, she seemed to drift off to sleep without any form of self-control. What on earth was wrong with her? She could see Genevieve lying on the wooden deck, in a contented ball, her legs outstretched, with Nancy's knitting at her side, that was now in a tangled mess. No doubt, when Nancy had fallen asleep, that naughty cat had been having fun with her wool. It was so messed up, her knitting could not be revived. Honestly, that cat was the absolute end. At this rate, well, Nancy could kiss goodbye to knitting anything for little Keegan. "So how is Keegan, Mum? I hope he's been good, has he?" "Oh, he's absolutely fine, darling," said Nancy, quickly allowing her eyes to wander over to little Keegan, who appeared to be blissfully sound asleep in his cot. It was most odd he hadn't woken up crying for a feed, but his cheeks were rosy, and he looked extremely content. "Well, I'm so pleased, Mum, he's well. I do miss the two of you, you know, when I'm at work. But I have to get on with things. It's a good job I'm kept so distracted, or I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about the both of you." "Well, it's very good the business keeps you busy, love," said Nancy. "You don't need to worry about a thing. You know that Keegan is safe with me." "Of course he's safe with you, Mum. You mustn't mind me. You know what I'm like. I worry far too much. But I'd never trust anybody with Keegan other than you. I have to say that since you've taken over watching him, his colic has mysteriously vanished, so you're doing something right. You've obviously got the magic touch." "Thanks for the vote of confidence, darling," said Nancy, feeling incredibly uncomfortable for her daughter's praise, of which she believed she was most unworthy. Little did Melinda know that Nancy had fallen asleep on her job twice in a row, and it hadn't just been for a simple cat nap, it had been for a couple of hours or more. Once the phone call had ended, Nancy was now very much wide awake, and absolutely determined to attend to her duties as caregiver for little Keegan. She tried to give Keegan some of her daughter's warmed-up breast milk, but Keegan wasn't having any of it, and didn't appear to show any interest in eating at all, which was somewhat confounding and rather unsettling for Nancy. She changed Keegan's nappy, and then wandered off into the kitchen to get a square slice of gooey butter cake that she had baked earlier on, as she suddenly had a craving for something irresistibly sweet. But when she removed the tea towel from the tin, she observed that all the gooey butter cake was missing. There was not even any crumbs left at the bottom of the pan. It was as clean as a whistle, so much so that she could easily wonder if she'd made the cake at all. The whole cake was missing, and in its place was a very interesting-looking fossil of a fern, and it was so beguilingly pretty that Nancy almost forgot about the missing gooey butter cake. "Wow, this is very pretty," she thought, deciding to put it on the mantel in the living room for display, among some of her other collector items. Nancy couldn't fathom what had happened to her gooey butter cake, and why in its place was a fossil of a fern. She remembered thinking she'd seen a tall shadow staring at her from the trees in the grove, but she thought she had imagined it all. But who had taken the gooey butter cake that she had left unattended on the Adirondack table on the porch many hours earlier? It didn't eat itself up, and fossils didn't randomly appear in cake tins, so what was going on? Nancy decided to keep the disappearance of the gooey butter cake to herself, and set about making another one for her daughter's return. Something was going on, and she wasn't sure what it was, but she would not be sharing her concerns with her daughter, lest her daughter should panic. She knew Belinda would abandon her job at the salon in a second if she suspected anything untoward was going on at home. When Melinda did return home that evening, she told her mother about her run-in in the woodgrove earlier on in the morning. "It was so lovely out there. I so enjoyed going for a jog. But I have to admit I got a bit of a start during the jog. It was probably nothing, of course," she said, waving a dismissive hand in front of her. "What do you mean?" Nancy asked her daughter. "Oh, it's nothing, really." "It's not nothing, darling," she said. "You had a start. What happened?" "Well, I don't want to alarm you, Mum, because it really was probably nothing. My mind was probably just playing tricks with me, that's all. I've probably been overthinking things with the business, you know." "Maybe you have, darling. But tell me what happened anyway. I am curious." "Well, when I was going for a jog in the grove, I could swear I heard someone coughing. But when I looked around, no one was there. To tell you the truth, I thought I was losing my mind. Because, as I said, there was no sign of anyone. Everything was still." "Well, it probably was nothing," said Nancy, pretending to agree with her daughter. "You've been so overworked, haven't you, since you've returned to the salon? It's hardly a wonder that you're hearing things that aren't actually there." "You're right, Mum. I'm overthinking things, aren't I?" said Melinda, unable to hide the relief on her face. "It's just I worry about Keegan, don't I? And when I heard the cough, it reminded me of the time there was a vagrant living on our property, and I would hate a stranger to be hanging around our place. I just wouldn't feel safe." Nancy was now secretly beginning to wonder if they had a problem. Was there a vagrant possibly living in their woodgrove? Had that vagrant slipped onto the porch earlier on in the day and eaten up her gooey butter cake, leaving behind a fossil as way of repayment? The thought that there might be some unwelcome stranger hanging around the woodgrove made Nancy feel exceedingly unsettled. She didn't want to worry Melinda. She needed to investigate the problem for herself, to find out the whereabouts of this stranger, who had absolutely no right to be camping out on their property. She'd tell him to leave the premises at once. This wouldn't be the first time that someone had been camping out on their land. The same thing had happened about 10 years earlier, when she discovered a strange man living rough in their woodgrove. As to why he had done this, no one knew. He had built for himself a makeshift shelter out of wood. He also had a hammock hanging between the trees. He would wash his clothes by the stream that ran through the woods. Nancy had only discovered his presence by chance, when she observed some rag-like clothing, full of holes hanging on the tree branches to dry. The man had been in his late 20s, and looked to be a simpleton. His 2 front teeth had been missing, and the rest of his teeth appeared to be rotting, and were yellow in colour. His hair was so messy, he looked like a scarecrow. The man, despite washing his clothes in the stream, had smelt like a skunk. So his rank body odour had got Nancy's attention, and that was how she had discovered him in the first place. When Nancy encountered the man and asked him what he was doing there, his wide brown eyes looked at her like a frightened wild animal that had come face to face with a deadly predator. The young man had simply bolted from the Stratton premises, leaving the little he had in life behind, including his hammock and a few pots and pans that she had found in his makeshift shelter. She had never seen him again, and so had no idea what his story was. These days, of course, Nancy was well aware that there were lots of homeless people living all over the Pacific Northwest, and maybe some loner, like the sorry lost-looking soul she had encountered that day, had decided to camp out on her property by the stream. And whoever he was, he clearly had a very sweet tooth, and wasn't adverse to stealing gooey sweet butter cake from people's porches. Mind you, Nancy knew very well that gooey butter cake was not something that would last very long in any household. It was so delicious, and almost impossible to resist. She thought about the tall, lofty, shadowy silhouette she was sure she had seen, standing behind the tree looking at her moments before that she had fallen asleep. She wondered if that was possibly the vagrant that was camping out on their property. Nancy reminded herself that her daughter Melinda had heard someone cough in the woodgrove while she'd taken her morning jog. She decided she would investigate the woods for herself, especially the area around the stream, to see if she could possibly find any signs of human habitation. The following morning she had taken little Keegan for his checkup, with Dr. Carter, who had praised Keegan's progress and said he was putting on a healthy amount of weight. And so despite his refusal to sometimes drink his late afternoon milk, it seemed all was well with her grandson, so at least she could relax.
"You must be doing something right, Mrs. Stratton," said Dr. Carter approvingly. "I'm incredibly impressed. There are no words. You seem to have had a breakthrough with Keegan, have you not? He looks like a completely different baby boy to the one that I saw 2 weeks ago. The transformation is nothing short of miraculous. He was very poorly, his complexion pale, his eyes dull, and his general constitution wasn't great. But look at him now. You'll be glad to know his vitals are excellent. He's now reached a healthy body weight. So you're doing something right. How is his colic? It's not giving you any problems, is it? He looks very contented to me. He hasn't cried at all since I've been looking at him."
Nancy paused for a moment and said, "Well, that is true. Keegan hasn't been any bother at all. He appears to have stopped crying, and we've all been able to get some quality sleep. So by all accounts, the colic appears to have gone."
"Well, that's very good news, isn't it?" said Dr. Carter. "But why do I get the feeling that there is a bit more going on here? You seem to be holding back on something. What is it?"
"Well, there is something as it happens."
"What is it?"
"Well, how do I put it, Dr. Carter? Sometimes during the afternoon, when a baby like Keegan should be hungry, he appears to have absolutely no appetite, which personally I find profoundly odd."
"Oh, don't worry about that, Mrs. Stratton. I can assure you when a baby is hungry you will know all about it. And if anything were wrong with your grandson, he wouldn't be putting on a healthy amount of weight, would he? If anything, he's the healthiest I've ever seen him. He's got colour in his cheeks, and his eyes are bright. 2 weeks ago, I would say his health was cause for concern. I didn't want to worry Melinda about it, of course, but I was concerned about seeing him today. But he's turned a corner. The news is very good indeed."
Nancy paused again and said, "Dr. Carter, over the last couple of days in the afternoon, when looking after little Keegan, well, the problem I'm going to talk about is concerning me, actually. I just seem to fall asleep. I try to stay awake looking after him, but sometimes I drift off, you know, for a long while. I'm wondering if there might be something wrong with me. I'm not getting any younger, you know. Melinda's entrusted me to take charge of little Keegan, and I'm worried about napping in the afternoon."
Mr. Carter laughed at Nancy and said, "You're looking after little Keegan, Mrs. Stratton, for Melinda, and as far as I can see you're doing a fine job. When Melinda brought Keegan to see me 2 weeks back, he wasn't in good shape. He was suffering from colic, and she was very concerned about his health. The good news is, as you were saying, the colic has disappeared. He seems perfectly healthy to me. I suspect it's what is known as a grandmother's magic touch. As for your falling asleep while looking after your grandson, well, that doesn't surprise me at all. It's a big responsibility taking care of a little one, and even the best of us are inclined to nod off. One thing about new mothers I know all too well is most of them are permanently exhausted. Some of them describe themselves as walking around like zombies. I wouldn't worry about your little naps. They're probably good for you, and they're certainly not harming little Keegan."
But Dr. Carter, I haven't told Melinda this because she'd probably panic if I were to do so. But I'm afraid I've under-exaggerated to you about how bad my sleeping in the afternoon really is. I made you think I was just having a nap, but it's much more than that, and I've got no control over it at all. I try to fight it off, I really do, but the next thing I know, I'm out like a light. Rather like a person with narcolepsy that can sleep any time, anywhere, at the drop of a hat. I rather suspect I'm becoming like that. Could I have developed narcolepsy, Dr. Carter? You see, I do need to stay awake for baby Keegan, while Melinda is at work in the salon. But I can be out for the count for over a couple of hours. My grandson doesn't even wake me up, which is profoundly odd. He's content all afternoon and doesn't demand anything of me at all. It's not normal for me to be asleep like this, is it?
If your grandson is gaining weight, he's healthy and happy, and not constantly crying for a feed, I fail to see what your problem is, Mrs. Stratton. Most people would be happy to get some quality kip, as mothers dream of having some undisturbed sleep. So quit worrying about it, even if it is a lot longer than your average nap. As to why your grandson is content in the afternoon and doesn't wake you up for a nappy change or a feeding, well, all I can say is count yourself as very lucky in that regard. You can have some time to yourself, even if it is enjoying an extended nap. I wouldn't worry about drifting off to sleep in the afternoon if I was you. That is very normal, all over the world, especially in places like Italy. It's perfectly natural for people to have a siesta in the afternoon for a few hours. Our bodies know exactly what they need, and when they demand sleep, they demand it. And I expect your body is being very demanding in its sleep requirements simply because you've taken on extra responsibilities, and one of them is caring for your grandchild. And as I keep telling you, it can take a lot out of you. No wonder you're exhausted, Mrs. Stratton. If you like, I can do some blood work on you. But my guess is your body is just needing extra sleep, simply because you're exhausted. Looking after a baby is very draining, even if you don't realize it. I know when my wife gave birth to our little girl, she was forever taking extended naps during the afternoon. What you're experiencing is perfectly normal, and it is no concern, I can assure you.
I suppose you're right, Dr. Carter. What you say makes perfect sense to me. I am overthinking things, aren't I? I'm being overwrought and irrational. Anyway, if Keegan really did need me, I would wake up to attend to his needs at once, because he would cry so loudly he would wake the living dead. Not that he's done that for a long time. So I guess I'm lucky. He's been rather undemanding of late.
You're very lucky, Mrs. Stratton. But for your sake, I hope it lasts. Many mothers I know don't get a wink of sleep or a moment's peace. And they walk around permanently tired. If you can get a few hours, Kip, embrace it. That's what I say. I mean, you and your daughter have been to hell for a long time with this colic that has kept you wide awake at night, and now it's gone. That's cause for celebration, is it not? But it also means your body is probably trying to catch up on some much-needed sleep.
You're right, Dr. Carter. I mean, we've been kept awake night after night with that colic. So it makes sense that my body is now just demanding all that extra sleep. Thanks for making it all make sense to me.
That's what I'm here for, Mrs. Stratton, to reassure my patients that they're doing a great job in raising their grandchildren. The trouble is, Mrs. Stratton, you and your daughter Melinda seem to have been cursed with that worry gene. So let it go, will you, and just relax, and everything else will go swimmingly.
When Nancy returned home from Keegan's check-up with the doctor, she was feeling a lot more happy and reassured. Dr. Carter was extremely impressed with a huge improvement in Keegan's health. He no longer had that insufferable colic and wasn't screaming all the time for attention. So what if she was drifting off to sleep in the afternoon? As Dr. Carter rightly pointed out, her body probably needed the extra sleep. Besides anything else, if Keegan needed her, she'd likely know about it, because he would wake her up with his cries. Yet she did privately ponder to herself how it was possible that Keegan could be gaining weight while eating less. He certainly wasn't getting through all the milk that Melinda supplied. Nancy was reminded of the job she needed to do right now. She was absolutely certain someone must be camping in the woodgrove by the stream on their property. She didn't feel remotely comfortable about a stranger on their premises, even if they were completely harmless. I mean, Melinda had heard a cough when she had gone for a casual jog in the woodgrove, which meant someone could be camping there, and it would explain the disappearance of the gooey butter cake, and the appearance of a strange fossil in the tin, along with the unsettling feeling that Nancy had always been getting when sitting out on the porch, of being watched all the time. I need to check this out, she thought, and tell that vagrant, whoever he is, to leave the premises at once, or I'll call the police on him. Nancy put some mace in the pocket of her denim shirt, almost as a precautionary measure, but doubted she would need to use it. But it was best to be prepared for every eventuality. The stranger that might be camping out in the woodgrove, like so many of these sad down-and-outs, probably was harmless enough. Probably one of those lost souls that was down on his luck. Even if she had sympathy for him, she didn't want a stranger she didn't know lurking around, not when she had the safety of little Keegan to consider. She put Keegan into his stroller, that was especially designed for mothers to use while jogging. Melinda had brought the stroller with the idea of getting fit while running with her baby. Nancy was not intimidated by very much, so if indeed a stranger was camping out on her property, she was not afraid to tell them to go. She had promised Melinda that she would take little Keegan for a casual stroll in the woods one day, so that he could enjoy the pretty scenery and warm sunshine on his skin, for you should never underestimate how much babies take in during their first months of life. The weather was so perfect, and Nancy was feeling encouraged about her visit to Dr. Carter. She thought some light exercise would serve her well, and might actually invigorate her enough to help prevent her from falling asleep again in the afternoon. It was so prepossessing in the woodgrove. Nancy hadn't taken a walk in the grove for many years. It was something her late husband Kenneth would regularly do, but Nancy had preferred to go to a yoga class in town twice a week, and that had been for her a satisfactory form of exercise. She realized as she sashayed through the trees down the windy woodland paths that she'd missed out on an awful lot, as walking out in nature is actually something that she was finding uplifting, and sharing the experience with baby Keegan was an absolute privilege. Most people who had a woodgrove on their property would surely take advantage of it, and yet she had ignored this labyrinth of tall, lofty trees for a long time, and felt almost ashamed of her apathy. She continued to walk down the paths, pushing the stroller ahead of her, with baby Keegan's big blue eyes staring up at the trees while he chuckled happily to himself, making some appreciative gurgling sounds that are so typical of babies. Nancy suddenly felt very exhilarated, as if some of the fogginess in her head was lifting, and with each step she took, she became significantly more energized. What a lovely day it was! The sun twinkled mischievously through the forest canopy, and shafts of whispering light stole their way through the branches of the trees, dappling the forest floor in an ethereal glaze that in itself was magnificent. It felt as if Nancy had entered another world. She observed squirrels scurrying up trees and rabbits darting around the woods happily. As she walked down the path, she could hear the gurgling sounds of the stream. There was something so soothing about the sound of water. When Nancy finally reached the stream, she searched for any evidence round and about herself of a possible stranger that could potentially be camping on her premises. She looked for those telltale giveaways, like clothes that might be splayed out on branches, or empty bottles of gin and vodka lying under bushes, but she saw nothing, and she wasn't sure whether to be relieved by this or frustrated, for someone had definitely eaten her gooey butter cake the previous day. For a moment she forgot about her search, as the silvery stream that galloped over the rocks with its foamy white discharge. It was mesmerizing to watch, and was a significant distraction. She lifted Keegan out of his stroller, and pointed to him at the stream. Keegan stared out at the water in fascination, with his large blue eyes that grew wider by the second.
That is a stream, Keegan. All that water, puddling over the rocks. It's called a stream. Isn't it pretty?
Nancy sat down for a moment on a flattened rock that overlooked the stream, with a stroller by her side. She placed baby Keegan on her lap, so that together they could enjoy the views over the water, while listening to the chirrups of the birdsong. All of a sudden, on the opposite bank of the stream, Nancy saw an ambiguous, obscure figure, similar to what she'd seen from the distance from the porch the previous day. She wasn't wearing her glasses again, so her vision was distorted. Her eyes narrowed as she tried to focus on the humanoid silhouette, but she couldn't see it very clearly. And then it just vanished before her, and she wondered once again if she was losing her mind. It seemed like only a moment had passed by, but when Nancy looked down on her lap, Keegan was all but gone. For a moment she started to panic, until she jumped up to the stroller and observed he was happily tucked behind a blanket and seemed very contented. He waved his arms around. She felt such a relief to see him in his stroller, safe and well, but she had no memory of placing him in there. Her last memory was of Keegan being on her lap, and the next thing he was in his stroller. How had that happened? The woodgrove seemed to have got a little cooler. The sunshine that trickled through the trees had all but dissipated, and it didn't feel like the early afternoon any more as if it was much later in the day. Nancy pulled out her cell phone and discovered that there were 10 missed calls from her daughter. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. How could that be? How was that even possible? For after she had seen that obscure figure, she was now experiencing the strange phenomenon of missing time. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.